When we think about trauma, when we speak about trauma, we always correlate it to a traumatic existential experience, like one of those situations where we really risked our life. But the reality is that trauma is much more subtle. Think about your body as a constant flow of water. Imagine that the water starts from here, from the top of your head, and it flows down into the floor. The traumatic experience or any kind of impression blocks the flow of water. It creates a little bit of issue with the drainage. When we are born, until the age of 7 years old, our brain state is in constant theta wave. This is the same wavelength of the brain of the deep meditative states. In this state, your mind is completely open and is constantly absorbing from the environment. So you're not protecting yourself, you're letting everything come in. All right, we're back at Wholegrain Wisdom at the couch, new format. We discussed last time. I brought in my wife to make questions, I answer. We try a little bit of this Q&A for Wholegrain Wisdom, and today I want to go deeper into what we are still getting wrong about trauma. Because there is a lot to say and a lot to do as a personal work, but somehow we are stuck into a wrong definition. So I don't know if there is already a first question that comes to your mind. Let's start.
Well, maybe we can just pick on what you were saying. Okay, what are we still getting wrong from the Western society about trauma when we talk about it?
The experience and the perception that I have had so far, working on myself first, but also working with all the other people that are in the community at Wholegrain Wisdom, is that when we think about trauma, when we speak about trauma, we always correlate it to a traumatic existential experience, like one of those situations where we really risked our life. And we could talk about several, severe accidents or other experiences that really we can recognize instantly that we developed an emotional response and reaction from it. But the reality is that trauma is much more subtle. In Buddhism, meditations, and in other ancient wisdom traditions, when we talk about this topic, they actually use a slightly different word. In English, the best translation would be impression. And for me, I actually took a lot of time to understand what it really meant, impression, and how to actually correlate it to the trauma and all of the somatic healing work that is becoming more and more popular in the West. So I would start from kind of like a biological explanation of how it all works. Is it good?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
So think about your body as a constant flow of water. Imagine that the water starts from here, from the top of your head, and it flows down into the floor. So first of all, the very best example to give, and if you have already read the work of Peter Levine and other scientists that have studied animals, they understood that anytime that there is a dangerous situation for an animal that we can so-called traumatic experience, as soon as they terminate the experience, let's say as soon as they stop running because they've been chased by a lion, they take their own time to ground themselves. So they take the time to shake, first of all, their body. If you actually have a pet in your house, we have dogs here, and you can see them shaking all the time, even just after being laid down on the floor. After that, they do a little bit of yoga, dog down and bottom up, and then they shake. This is the best example of imagining that when this water flows through your body and the traumatic experience or any kind of impression blocks the flow of water, it creates a little bit of issue with the drainage. At the beginning, when the impressions are small, they're like little sandstones. But then the bigger the experience and the more that it accumulates, imagine all of these sandstones accumulating slowly into bigger rocks and bigger rocks. And so if you don't shake, you cannot allow the cleaning and the drainage of all of this material, and the flow of water slowly starts to diminish until the point where we got sick for real and we get into chronic situations where the pain doesn't seem to go away, and apparently no medical real explanation exists. Because think about 90% of the illnesses today in the Western society, they're all caused by chronic situations. And chronic situations are an accumulation of all of these impressions, of all of these traumatic experiences, depending on the level of intensity. And if they're not cleaned, then this water flow cannot pass through our body.
This is super important, and I think also understanding this difference, no? That you said, okay, how does this translate into the body, and what we can feel and grasp when something like this happens. I do believe, though, that we just, for the people to understand that are following us, that we haven't really defined what is a good example of trauma then, because we said, okay, the trauma is not per se, it definitely can be an accident, something major that happens to you, but it could also be something subtle that you don't really understand that it's happening in the moment that it's happening. So can we maybe provide a clearer example on a daily life experience of something that could be converted into a traumatic experience for somebody?
Yeah, so I would say, let me connect back to the work and the topic of the subconscious mind that we touched in our previous videos. Because once you talk about trauma, once you talk about the impressions that are being saved, kind of like, kind of like an error log of your computer that is saved into the database, right? We need to talk about where they go, where do they get saved? And the location is our subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is also the location where we save all of the files of our belief systems. So all of our beliefs, what we believe in, and therefore what we do unconsciously because we believe it's normal to do these kind of things, they all reside in the subconscious mind. And the impression, the negative impression, the traumatic experience, when it gets kind of like a bigger problem, they all get to be saved in the very same location. So in my own personal work, I can describe and relate what I've done in the past. So I started to work on myself, and through the methods of subconscious energy release, some cases hypnosis, in other cases just very deep meditation states, and journaling, then you go and ask your subconscious whether what you're doing right now is triggering you a positive emotion or a negative emotion. This is already the very first step to start to understand whether there is some kind of negative impression saved in your database versus there is nothing to work on. Because anything that triggers us, it's connected to a belief that we saved at some point in our life, and it's been activated anytime that we find ourselves in a very similar situation. So, for example, some months ago, I was working on, let's say, a situation where I would have found myself very happily opening my house for cooking for my friends. And in another situation, in a different setting, I would find myself not happy and actually very constrained to be in a restaurant and offer dinner to my friends. And so I started asking myself, how is it even possible that if I cook for my friends and I actually invest way more time and effort to provide an amazing meal for my friends, I feel love and compassion, and I'm happy to do that. But in the same setting, but in a different environment, if I actually have to pay out of my own pocket, then I would find myself in a situation of discomfort. this is already kind of like one of those perfect examples where, okay, there is something triggering me. There must be something there that I saved in my belief system that is being triggered. Is kind of like this rock that is inside that is blocking my natural flow of energy. The natural flow would be being abundant, being happy, being generous, and offering to everybody. But in this case, I couldn't do it. And I couldn't justify logically why this was happening. So I went deep into meditation. I've done some other exercises that the people at Wholegrain Wisdom are trained to be learning how to do for themselves. We're talking about subconscious communications, energy release, muscle testing, etc., etc. And I discovered that this situation, this trigger, was a belief, was a memory that I saved when I was younger. When I was in primary school, I lended a notebook to a friend in the classroom, and I expected the same notebook to be coming back after the day that he bought a new one. And then the day came, and this friend of mine brought me the notebook, but for some reason it was not the same quality that the one that I gave him. And for me, it was not a big problem. But when I got home, my mother started to yell at me because she said, "Oh, Ale, my gosh, you've been cheated because, this quality notebook that I buy for yourself, and there's so much care behind this, and you just gave it away, and then this friend of yours gave you a low quality book." So for some reason, that situation in my subconscious mind got saved as an impression. Imagine like a photogram of a picture, and you save it into your database. Somehow, that impression made me believe that if I give away my material wealth to somebody, then either I don't get it in return, so I'm kind of in limitation, or even worse, I get it less than before. So I get cheated, let's say. But of course, in the situation where I was cooking for my friends, I was not giving away my material wealth. I was giving away my time. And in that case, for some reason, I never created any limiting belief about my time. I always think that I can do everything, and even if I'm overwhelmed, I always find a way to make it happen. And so in this case, for me, it's like I have unlimited time, but I don't have unlimited wealth, material wealth. And so in this case, that's the reason of the trigger.
Okay. But I mean, this is interesting because I was thinking what you were saying, no? And also that in the Western society, when we talk about trauma, in many cases, we connect the trauma to something that happened to us when we were kids. And also the example that you just gave us is connected with something that happened to you when you were at elementary school, so also a very young kid. So I wonder, is it true that the majority maybe of these traumatic experiences are built up in the first years of our life? Or maybe when we're adults or when we're older, we kind of relate to these experiences in a different way, and therefore we kind of build up this little pieces of sense in our subconscious in a different way. Does it make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, so we need to make a little bit of a step backward first to answer, because first we need to understand that when we are born, until the age of 7 years old, our brain state is in constant theta wave. This is the same wavelength of the brain of the deep meditative states. So what neuroscience says is that in this state, your mind is completely open and absorbed. How do you say it? Your mind is completely open and is constantly absorbing from the environment. So you're not protecting yourself, you're letting everything come in. So from 0 to 7, these are the formative years where every single experience that you have, and of course the most important experiences are usually the ones that you have with your parents, your mother and your father, or just your caregivers if you don't necessarily spend so much time with your parents, and everybody around you. But of course, the more time you spend with the same person, the more emotional bond that you create, and therefore the more absorbing you are with this person. So when something happens during these 7 years, it's usually called, kind of like the substratus of the belief system that you're going to build up, upon which after the 7 years old, you're going to maintain and either enrich in the same level. So basically, in this case, you would continuously prove all of these patterns and all of the belief systems that in most cases are limiting belief systems. You will continuously prove them right. So you will find yourself in situations that are going to prove. This is the classical confirmation bias that in psychology we speak a lot about. So because my mother told me that this situation happens when I do this kind of action, then your life will constantly repeat this kind of experience to prove you're right. Because every time also in the last episodes we were talking about projecting your reality. This is one of these examples. I believe X, I project X, I get confirmation about X, so I continuously reinforce this belief that this is what happens. Of course, the inner work and the work that we do at Wholegrain Wisdom is exactly going back into the past, discovering them, understanding what they are, where they've been stored, and release them forever and rewire them into something that serves you more. But so, yes, formative years from 0 to 7 are the fundamental patterns, but of course, new things can come up during the rest of your life, or new things can appear as new, even though they are exactly the same pattern that you already established when you were younger, but in this case, is a different kind of size, let's say. So if one time you needed to learn a lesson about life, and the lesson was, like a simple experience, but you didn't get there. So the next time it will be a little bit harder, the next time a little bit harder, until the point that, it actually gets very problematic. And this is kind of the reason of why people get into burnout. The burnout is pushing through this flow of water, as we said at the beginning, but you're so full of rocks that you're literally trying to go upstream against the tide and against the flow, the natural flow. And at some point you just run out of energy and you collapse, because there is literally no other way to do it.
I mean, this is a bit of a controversial question, but can we say then that trauma is actually serving us?
Well, again, if we look at it from an ancient wisdom perspective and we bring into a little bit of a spiritual conversation, then pain and anything that is difficult in life is of course made to help us grow and evolve. I think it's quite normal in the West to describe difficult situations, especially when you want to achieve high results from a professional level. For some reason, in a professional setting, all of these are kind of like the norm, and they're even, especially if you're an entrepreneur and if you come from the high achievement business settings, all of these challenges, they're actually like the benchmark to which you compare yourself against the others. But the real fundamental truth is that all of these lessons are meant for our inner self, our real self and consciousness, to develop further and further and understand the lessons that from the more, painful experiences, you slowly liberate yourself. That's what in Buddhism you would eventually say, you remove the weeds so that the garden can grow beautifully. And slowly you get towards the path of liberation. The path of liberation is one of those situations where you are completely equanimous, you're completely non-attached to what happens in front of you. So if you're still getting triggered by some events that are making you feel, oh no, this is mine, or no, this is my right, some kind of like all of those experiences that really go deep into your ego, all of them, they are actually signals to tell you there is something to work there, and there is a way that you can detach completely from those experiences. I want to close this specific topic with one example from biochemistry and neuroscience. One example that really shocked me in the past, and I think it shocked you too when you also acknowledge it yourself, is that 90 seconds is the time that it takes for a chemical reactions from the brain to the body during a negative experience. So anything that happens after the 90 seconds from an emotional reaction standpoint is your own story, is the ego inside of you that is telling you the story to reinforce this situation. There is absolutely nothing that would justify, from a chemical perspective, continuing to feel the way that you feel. So if you feel angry or any other kind of limiting emotions, after 90 seconds of an event, this is a clear sign that there is an impression, there is a negative traumatic experience inside of you that you need to release. If you want to know how, of course, this is the work that we do at Wholegrain Wisdom, where we are connecting the science and the ancient wisdom to finally prove they're the same fundamental truth. And even more so, we're putting all of these tools available to accelerate humanity's healing. If you're curious, check it out and continue watching, asking questions. If you want to have an answer to a specific point that is still kind of buzzing in your mind and you haven't had the real explanation that you need to move forward, let us know in the comments and we'll be happy to plan it into our next videos.
Thank you for listening.